Thank you very much. So, wow, this is a large audience. I didn't expect this, but yeah, pretty cool. First time at BSidesMCR, so it should be fun. So today I'm going to be talking about APT15, also known as Keychang or Mirage. And the reason I'm talking about APT15 is that last year, NCC Cyber Defense Operations Team were involved in an investigation that was attributed to APT15. And during that investigation, we were able to uncover more than 200 C2 commands from compromised hosts, which gave us a very good insight into the operation of the group on a compromised network. We also managed to retrieve several backdoors, tools that were used by the group, which I'm going to discuss today. But before I do so, I would like first to, so basically, I'll first give a brief overview of who APT15 is for the audience here who don't know, what's APT number mean, and then I'll talk about the case that we were involved in, then the tools. So who is APT15? APT15 first came into public attention in 2014, and that was when FireEye published the report Operation Keychang. That was around the same time that the campaign Keychang was around the same time as the G20 summit, I believe, at that point in time. That was during the Syrian crisis, and they managed to get access to a C2 for a brief period of time, I believe less than a day, and they managed to get insight into the campaigns that were operated by APT15 at the time. They managed to get insight into the tools used by the group, and they found out that actually they were targeting several ministries of foreign affairs in this campaign in several European countries, different industries as well, but definitely there was a focus on government entities per se. And they estimated that the group had been on operation since at least 2010. Typical mode of operation involves spear phishing targets. So attachments, emails to targets look very familiar, look very reasonable. And yeah, they would leverage typically word vulnerabilities in order to ultimately get the backdoor on the victim. From 2014 till 2016, nothing has been published about APT15, at least in the public domain, until Palo Alto released a blog post discussing Tidepool, which was a campaign, again, that was attributed to APT15. And the campaign was targeting several Indian embassies this time. They were leveraging word vulnerability in order to ultimately launch Tidepool, which was a backdoor that was an evolution from previous backdoors that FireEye discussed in Operation Keychang. So yeah, typical vulnerabilities include Word, sometimes even PDF reader, Adobe PDF reader, even Java. So the names you can see down there, BMW, MyWeb, BS2005. These are the names that FireEye gave to the backdoors. And I think the names are taken from the debug information inside the PE header. So in the debug directory, you can get like the path of the project in Visual Studio, and so you can see there they named it according to the path there. So according to FireEye, the campaign from 2007 started with what was called MyWeb and BMW, and then evolved into BS2005. And that continued until 2016, which was when Tidepool was introduced into the tool set of this actor. So the case is for a global technical and management consulting company. They had offices in the UK, USA, India, several places around Europe, defense contractor. They operated in several sectors, including, funnily, cybersecurity. And the incident basically started off in April 2017. In April 2017, there was a Mimikatz alert that was caught by the customer, and they started the investigation because their AV basically flagged Mimikatz. When they started the investigation, then they called out the NCC in May 2017. That's when we got involved. We started to look at traces of activity, and we found that actually the actor had been on the network since at least May 2016. And the reason I'm saying at least is that we found that the customer was going through a huge IT transformation project during that same period in time. So it's highly likely that a lot of forensic evidence was lost. And so we couldn't actually trace it even back further. We continued the investigation until the end of June, and we found traces of data exfiltration in April. And then in June, they asked us to stop the investigation because they had handle over things and they could take things from there. So we did. And then come August 2017, they asked for our help again. And they say, well, it seems like the attacker has been on the network again. So right after we left in June, the attacker got in again, and that's when we found, that's why we got called in August. We continued the investigation until October, and that's when it concluded from our side. Typical TTPs for this actor, obviously Mimikatz. So they use Mimikatz to get domain creds and use domain creds to move laterally across the network. They tried to use Mimikatz to get a Kerberos golden ticket. That didn't work. They managed to steal a VPN cert for a user and use the creds in order to log in, and that's how they got in the second time around. So that's when they got in after we left the first time. They leveraged whatever was present on the machines, so typical tools available on any Windows box. They would mount the $C share on a remote machine, copy the backdoor, and then remote exec the backdoor, and so on and so forth, using domain creds. Well, what was interesting is that they didn't stop there. I mean, they even went further to use tools that were, in some cases, present with vanilla installations of like MS SQL. So Microsoft SQL, you get a handy utility called BCP, which is like bulk copy program. And that allows you to copy data out of SQL or into it. And you can see there, this is a decoded command from the C2. So BCBs and then a select statement there. That's actually sent from the C2 to the compromised machine. They brought in tools, whatever they wanted in order to do the job. So remote exec, something called NutEnum, which is like a vulnerability scanning tool. I apologize for many of you pen testers who probably know these stuff. I'm not, so I do apologize. CSVDE is apparently a tool that allows you to dump stuff from MS AD, so Active Directory. You can dump data in CSV format, and they use that in order to dump data from the customer's Active Directory. But they didn't stop at just like off-the-shelf tools. They created their own stuff. They've been long enough there in order to go back and create their own stuff. And we found two bespoke tools and probably keyloggers that we used using a builder, probably. So one tool was used in order to enumerate Microsoft SharePoint. So they created a .NET tool to connect to SharePoint and look for specific project IDs. So they knew what they were looking for. They had specific project IDs they were looking for in SharePoint. They would get the links in SharePoint for these documents, dump them out, and then that would be exfiltrated. Another tool had been used to connect to Exchange. So they had user creds. Again, that was specifically with hard-coded IP addresses inside the tool. Connect to Exchange using user creds, enumerate everything, subjects, attachments, body, search by everything, dump everything out to a file, and then, they would exfiltrate that. This is, as you can see up there, that's basically a hard-coded path for one of the keyloggers. So you can see this is like a user path. So obviously they had access to the user account, and then they went and built the keylogger, and then came back and deployed it, because otherwise they wouldn't have access to that path. Typically, exfiltration took place in raw archives. So information they were after was military projects that the client might have been engaged in, emails, network reconnaissance information. What was interesting was the naming convention used for the archives. So you can see there 03310. Does anyone want to take any guess what this means? No. So this is March the 31st, archive number 0. So that was very handy for us in order to tell us actually this was when the archive was created, or the data started to be collected in this archive in this date, because they use dates. And then we can obviously correlate that with the timeline on the timestamps for when the file was created. The other thing was they used heavily batch files for everything. I don't know if this is intentional or due to the weakness of the actor. I don't know, but some of the backdoors didn't have persistence in them, so they wouldn't persist on reboots, etc. But they would go on and create a batch file that would create a run key for the backdoors, and then execute the batch files for the backdoors to persist. They used batch files and even to like run commands and then pipe these commands into a file and then exfiltrate the file. So I'm not sure why they heavily relied on batch files to like execute what they wanted. Many of the backdoors you'll come across, they would take commands, execute them, and then just post the result back to the C2 right away. They wouldn't just write the command to a batch file and then execute it and then post the data back. But yeah, this was one, like, if there was one unique attribute about this actor, I guess this would be it. The other thing which is interesting from the decoded commands was, you can see there a typo. So C Windows system, and they had a typo there with system. This gave us insight into the fact that probably this is not an automated like server-side script that's just sending queries to the backdoors. This is probably someone manually sitting on the other end, typing commands that get sent to the backdoor and then get executed. So the tools I spoke about, the keyloggers, so they had the bespoke tools, the keyloggers, MS SharePoint, MS Exchange, enumeration tools. They brought in off-the-shelf tools in order to do the job. But we found 3 different backdoors on the customer's network. BS 2005 was perhaps one that was previously discussed by FireEye, but we found it there. We didn't find typepool, which means probably that the actor doesn't have to stick to what's new when they're using the backdoors. They'll use the backdoors that do the job for them. Meaning, even though typepool was released in 2016 and this was the latest backdoor in their arsenal, we didn't find that. We found BS 2005. What was new was 2 other backdoors, Royal CLI and Royal DNS, which I'll discuss now. So Royal CLI had a compile date of 2015, and the name comes from the debug information, so I'm just following convention here. And these were the C2s there. What was interesting about this backdoor was a trick first time I see this trick, which is they copied CMD into the current working directory, and then they would patch it. So they would look for a specific string inside CMD called disable CMD, and then change one character from a D to an E. Does anyone know what disable CMD is? What does it do? Yeah, that's the one exactly. Yeah. So basically, CMD, when it starts, it will check this registry key, and if it's set to a value of 2, I believe, then it exits execution. And if it doesn't exist, it will continue execution. So you can set to basically block CMD from running on machines by setting this registry key. Apparently, they ran into problems before, and they rely heavily on CMD to run their commands. So they would copy CMD into the current working directory, patch it, and use that version instead of the default CMD sitting in system32. The configuration file, which included the C2s, was typically dropped in the temp directory. It was Zor encoded, and I mean, at the end of the talk, you'll find the link to all the scripts that you can use if you run into instances of this backdoor, or if you want to play with the backdoor and learn more about it. There were lots of similarities with BS 2005 and MyWeb, specifically the mode of communication. So they use HTTP, and they use the iWeb browser to com interface to instrument IE. So like the HTML files that will get fetched will typically get cached on the machines, which is this is why we had access to the 200 C2 or more commands, because we had so many HTML files cached on the compromised hosts that we took, decrypted, and understood actually what happened there. The beacon of Royal CLI goes something like, it's a GET request, starts with an ID, an ID parameter, which is an infection identifier, followed by a page parameter, which is the host name, Zor and base 64 encoded, and then you get the row parameter, which is the encryption key. So the row parameter holds the Zor key, which decodes the page parameter, which is the host name. Mode of operation involves heartbeat, which is just get requests to help.aspx. Typically, the C2 responds with a number of milliseconds for the backdoor to sleep, and then a flag. The flag would then tell the backdoor what should it fetch on the second time after it sleeps. So if the flag is not set, it will just continue in the heartbeat operation and continue getting a number of milliseconds to sleep. If the flag is set, then it fetches a personal note and communicates personal note HTML, which is an HTML that will carry execution functions that the backdoor needs to operate. This is an example of an HTML file retrieved from one of the compromised hosts. So you can see there, prepended to the HTML, base 64 encoded data, in between backward slashes, and that's basically the command. They're not using the same Zor key that is in the row parameter in the HTML there. So I believe the first 16 bytes would form a seed that they would use in order to generate the key that would then be used to decrypt the commands. This is an example of a decoded command. So you can see there it starts with an 03. This 03 is basically an identifier for a function that the backdoor needs to perform. So they had like different hex numbers for different operations. And then followed by some data and then a string. And you can see at echo off, cd, c windows temp, ipconfig. This is the batch file. So they're writing this string to a batch file, and then they will execute that batch file in order to retrieve the commands. And this is all piped to info.temp. So what was interesting about the way this whole thing works is how they actually track writing to files. So this is a write, this is not an execution function. So O3 means write to file. So how do they know which file to write to? The C2 will be sending a number that they would be using on the server end to track which file they're writing to. This number gets multiplied by a constant in the backdoor, and the resulting ID number gets appended to tilde CLI temp.ini. So tilde CLI temp, and then that number .ini will be read, and then the CN key will have the path of the file that the data gets written to. It's a very convoluted, long way to write to a file. But why are they going through this hassle? So they have other keys, BN, BS, TB. The BN is the block number, BS is the block size, and TB is the index inside the block. So this means that they will be reading that file and then moving the index 18 blocks in the file and then starting to write from index number 0. The reason they're using this is, I guess, in order to track execution, to track basically how far they've gone. If the connection drops or for some reason, during the writing to a file or during the reading from a file, anything happens, they can go back to the INI file and continue from where they stopped. They used two file mapping objects for reading and writing. My R object is for reading file from file, so they would map the file and then use that handle for reading. And the my W object will be used for writing. And later you'll see why this is significant or why this is important. This is briefly like some of the functions that the backdoor employs. So like any backdoor, download, execute, upload data, with the addition of like patching CMD. This is like they have this thing that they can redo the whole patching process again if it didn't work the first time. Next one is BS 2005. We found two samples for BS 2005. One was packed with VM Protect, and the other was not. So the 2016 sample was packed with VM Protect, and for some reason it was used to download the unpacked version of the sample, and the unpacked version was used in order to execute. They used the unpacked version throughout. Like when they moved laterally, they would copy this unpacked version rather than the packed one, which is weird. I guess maybe for some reason AV picked up the packed version, but it's VM Protect. It's a legitimate packer. I don't know why would they use the unpacked version. Again, HTTP mode of communication, using the iWeb browser's do COM interface, so cached HTML is on the compromised hosts. This is what a beacon looks like for BS 2005. So it's a post request instead of a get, and the data is base 64 and AES encrypted this time. The AES IV is the last 16 bytes, and the key is the first 16 bytes. So this gives, the IP address, the host name, and an infection identifier when it starts. Unlike Royal CLI, the C2, when it responds back with an HTML, the commands are not actually prepended to the HTML. They're inside a view state field. So they would go and read the HTML, find the view state field, and look for two markers. And you can see that they're highlighted in red. This is like Google and 2WP8H. But these markers change from backdoor to backdoor. Whatever backdoor, we found like earlier sample of BS 2005 using different markers, but typically they will be included in between markers. And the data inside is, again, base 64 and AES encrypted. Last up is Royal DNS. This was the last addition to the toolset, and this was interesting. It was quite different from the previous ones. As you can see there, the compile date is 2017, and this is in March, which was like basically a few months away from when we started the investigation, or when, yeah, basically a month away from the Mimikatz alert. And this one contains persistence. So you get a service, it's a DLL, it runs as a service under SVC host. By default, the service is NWS AP agent, but that can be changed. The DLL can take arguments to change the service name, and it uses DNS for communication. For some reason there, sorry, the image is, not showing the rest of the sentence. That's my mistake, I apologize. This is what the beacon looks like. So it's a text request, and as you can see there, I've highlighted, so many of you might be familiar with what a text request format looks like. So the 3F there that's highlighted in red is basically the length of the first subdomain. So the first number of characters that should be read. And then the second one up is 12. That's again the length of 12 characters. And then finally you get 08, which is ANSPER's, the length of the ANSPER's domain, and then .com, which is 3. ANSPER's DNS resolver is the one that's only going to be able to resolve these requests. So the DNS request will get passed on and on until the resolver for that specific domain gets the request, and basically the data that gets sent is what will be decoded or handled by the C2. The data doesn't make much sense, as you can see there. It's basically a sequence of bytes. You can see 01, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see like a sequence there. It doesn't make much sense. Unfortunately, when we were looking at the sample at the time, the C2s were down. So we didn't really make much sense out of this information. But it would go on. So the first request would be a 5 followed by the sequence of data. And then it will try again with X instead of 5. Try again with 3. And then base 32 encodes the same data. So the same data, the same zeros, and then 0, 1, 2, 3 gets base 32 encoded, and then gets appended to 3. And then the same thing again with V instead. And it goes on in like an infinite loop, just trying to post this request to the DNS. So this is purely here because we couldn't get the C2 working or responding to any of the requests. This is purely from reverse engineering. So if the C2 responds, they would hash the host name, XOR it with a volume serial number, and then use that as a fingerprint for the infection. They would typically read data from, and then go on and read data from C Windows temp s.txt. This is hard-coded. So they always read the same file, RC4 encrypt the data, and encode it, and then send the DNS request with this information. If a response is received from the C2, then they would execute these commands. The functions of the backdoor are very limited, so it only supports execution and download. Doesn't upload really. It reads basically the output of the execution from s.txt, encodes it and sends it back. So basically execute, retrieve the result of the execution, or download data to a hard-coded path, which is C Windows temp r.exe. What was interesting was they used the same file mapping object name. In this case, my W object, which was very, when I first saw this, I was like, I saw this before. Where did I see it? And that was Royal CLI. And so this was a very good indicator of this is actually the same thing. This is actually the same group, probably. Even though they moved away from HTTP, even though they're using persistence as the backdoor, that was what gave it away. They would typically, again, use batch files. So this was another thing. Commands were written to r.bat in the C Windows temp directory. They get executed, and the commands get piped. The result gets piped into s.txt, which gets, on each iteration, read, RC4 encoded, etc., etc. When you look at even the function for the writing or downloading to files, you can see there it's almost identical. So this is the file mapping. So my W object, how it's used basically. So when they download data, they would write it to r.exe. It's the same function that Royal CLI uses when they download data and write it to a file. And they're using the same INI technique as well. Yeah, basically exactly the same. So thank APT15 for code reuse, because that was very useful for us to actually tie this sample to the previous samples. Copy pasting functions is heavily actually used across different actors and different tools. And so it's a good technique, generally speaking, to try to find similar samples. We found that actually they didn't have any problems investing time developing their own tools for the target. So, I mean, they've been there since at least May 2016, so why wouldn't they? They would go back, write their SharePoint or Exchange enumeration tools, and then deploy them, and yeah, why not? Probably operation and development go hand in hand for this group, so they're not separate. I believe, or I think that in some instance of actors out there, they would outsource development, or development done by a different group, and so operation would be development would be separate. But the fact that we had this builder for the keylogger, we had the .NET tools, I think probably it's the same person or team that are behind this. You can find the decoding scripts and YAR signatures for this group on the NCC group's GitHub page. And that's all right. Thanks to everyone who has actually helped with this. So this is a shout out to the guys in NCC and Fox IT who were very helpful on this operation. I believe I'm very early on time, so happy to take questions.
Superb. So do we have any questions for him?
Yep.
Just to say, we'll put the top right there. Do you want us to bring the mic up to you?
Yeah, please.
Oh, I've got to run now. I'm walking. I'm not running. I'm sorry. I could have had a question down at the bottom. I need to lose some weight.
Thanks, Tom. When you were looking at this, did you get any indication of what level of automation was there? Was there a lot of interaction with the attackers, or did it do most of this stuff like from scripts and automatically?
Automation, you mean obviously on the server side?
Yeah.
So when we were there, I don't believe we had activity ongoing. So during the times that NCC CDO were involved, which is for, I believe, a couple of months and then a couple of months later, so 2 intervals, we don't think we've had a lot of interaction when we were there with the attacker. But I think it's hard to guess the level of automation. The fact that they were using like manual commands for the backdoors, I wouldn't say there is a lot of automation happening in the background on the server side, but that's a pure guess because I don't have insight into the C2. Like I didn't get access to this. So yeah.
Oh, good. Not too far.
Was the environment being attacked Windows-only environment? Because all of the examples you gave there were attacking Windows systems as opposed to Unix or anything else?
So the question is whether the attacks were only focused on Windows platforms. Yes, definitely. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we couldn't find any instance of attacks on non-Windows servers on the client. That's right. A bit of exercise in the morning. Yeah.
One of these sets of stairs, aren't you? If I do fall over, everybody cheer, by the way.
Do you have any idea of the volume of data and number of files that got exfiltrated in this?
We do. I mean, I don't have the exact figures off the top of my head, but we definitely traced the number of files that were exfiltrated and the data that were exfiltrated. So we're looking at emails, documents, network mapping information. In terms of volume, I don't think it was large per se, not huge, but definitely important information.
Oh, not too far. Good. Well done.
Thanks. Do you have any idea why the attacker was picking this target? Like, have you found them at other similar related clients? Is there anything in common that way?
So we think it's the typical, I think, kind of like supply chain. So they're after government-related information. So they went to a contractor and they targeted that contractor to get that information. Previously, they were targeting, according to FireEye and Palo Alto, government entities, so embassies, etc. So it looks like instead of going directly to their targets, they're going through someone who will be working with their target in order to get the information.
Thanks for presentation. I just have a...
There's a...
Yeah, I just have a small question.
Sure.
You said that development and operation were going together. So, and what do you think the code, it looks like bang, bang production, or they still invest time in testing and everything because of the typos and everything?
I don't think there's a lot of testing happening, and this is evident, I say, from the DNS, the Royal DNS sample. The fact that they had hard-coded paths there. So they had like s.text, r.exe. The fact that you hard-code a path for downloading a file, that means you're poking your idea. You're basically hard-coding this and seeing if it works, and then yeah. So I think it's kind of like iterative model of write code, send it out, see if it works. Yeah, that kind of mode. I think so.
So there was a second exfiltration or second compromise in the timeline. What recommendations did you make for preventing the compromise? I mean, in terms of detection, rather than just waiting for the accident to happen.
That's a very good question. Unfortunately, I'm not the one who actually did the report, and so. But typical recommendations, really, for many of the incidents that we run into involving patching systems, making sure that you could have a good hygiene, IT-wise, in your estate. I don't think there's anything. I mean, the case of some of the compromised hosts were for users who were actually consultants working in specific sectors. And so education for these consultants would have helped. What emails should you open? Who should you trust? Do you expect these sort of emails? That sort of thing.
But the exfil was over HTTP, right? So it was
yeah. I mean, obviously, in terms of like they went and they included like IDS, firewall, the standard that you would get in many environments. But that on its own, I don't think, because that's after the backdoor has already been on the network, right? So you don't want to be, chasing beacons. You want to be preventing the backdoor in the first place getting onto the machines. Yeah.
Hi, so I'm always interested in cases like this. Did you have any involvement with law enforcement with all your findings afterwards?
There was definitely law enforcement involved in this case. I'm not sure I can share a lot of details, but yeah, there was involvement. There was interaction definitely because there was government-related information.
Do you have any more questions? Oh, you joke.
So were you able to
he's shouting.
understand who the actor was exactly? I mean, in terms of attribution, were you able to work that out, or is it just?
So we attributed the actor to the same. So the attribution was to the same group that we know of, which is APT15. FireEye, when they did their Keychang report, they believed that the operation originated from China. And according to our analysis as well from the C2s, we can probably make the same conclusion that they were operating out of China as well. Who in China? I don't know, obviously. I don't know.
What characteristics were you using to attribute the actor then?
Code. So code in the samples. Things like HTTP, IE web browser 2. I mean, this is common, obviously, across many malware, but the combination of things together will make it clear, okay, this is the same thing that FireEye talked about and Palo Alto talked about, so it's probably the same group. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions? It's okay, we've got loads of time.
Thanks very much for the presentation. Always useful to get an insight into what the bad guys are up to. They don't seem to have covered their tracks very well, though.
No.
Do you think they didn't care?
Correct. Yes, there was definitely a sense of not caring if they get caught or they're found out, because they came in the second time right after we left, and I completely agree. There's sense of trying to hide their tracks or anything like that? No, none of that.
Super, thank you.
Do you think they knew about you? Do you think that when you kicked them out the first time, they knew it was NCC?
Did they know that someone was on the network? Probably yes. NCC specifically, I don't know. I wasn't on the network. I was more of the reverse engineer. But Rob, who worked with me on this investigation, and Alex are not. I don't think they're here today. They would be better positioned to answer that. Whether they were saying that they were NCC on the network, but I don't think they knew someone was on the network. Whether it was NCC or not, I don't think so.
I'm wondering how mature the client thought they were in terms of their SOC capability. Was it somebody's job to spot this sort of attack? And what was their reaction based on the fact that they had to wait for mimikatz?
So again, I can't really answer that question very well because I wasn't involved on the customer side very much on the network. But I can tell you that they had the mimikatz alert and they started off that alert and they started to triage things. But in terms of what we find typically, I mean, not myself, but the incident response guys, is that many customers will have, nice budgets and they'll put nice appliances here and there, but they wouldn't have processes. They wouldn't have the proper, things like who would do what and when this escalates, who to escalate it to, and what should they be doing. These kind of steps are not very clear, so they would spend money on very expensive kits, but it would be useless because there would be no one really looking at this sort of thing.
Alright, so I don't work in the cyber defense, but from my perspective, it looks like they use quite a dated techniques. Quite dated techniques in terms of compromise. Yeah. Like if they're dropping binaries on drive, they're using DNS queries for communications. They're using batch files, which kind of is a blast loop pass. I don't see any PowerShell stuff. Nothing which would be kind of characteristic of a modern red teaming techniques or not TAS type stuff. So I'm surprised
no power exploit, typical.
I'm quite surprised by having me code even quicker. And the fact they don't care kind of suggests
maybe they don't
have
need to.
a government behind them.
In some instances, they don't need to. Maybe. So this is one thing. Like I've been doing like malware for quite a long time, and there are, from my experience, there are these types of new offensive techniques that everyone starts to use at a certain point in time, and the whole industry just rushes to try to prevent these sort of techniques and forgets about what actually already, standard stuff that's been used for a long time. So in some instances, you don't need to use fancy new offensive techniques or, use the latest kit from DOSification or whatever. You don't sometimes need to do any of this stuff. It's very simple because simply the network or the target that you're interested in is very weak.
Hello. Has any of the exfiltrated data turned up anywhere, and is there any active monitoring to see if it will and when?
Not there very well. No.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions? Down at the bottom, no problem. I feel like Barrymore's when we used to diddle 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 diddle. That's showing my age a little bit there.
So they're in the network for quite a while, and you're not really sure how long they're in there because obviously they did a transformation piece. Are you certain it's just one actor, or was it multiple actors in there at the time?
We think it's one, from what we looked at. I mean, they had obviously lots of alerts and stuff, but from our work, I think it was all tied to this actor.
Super. Do we have any more questions? Superb. Right, well that was a lot of questions, I must admit. Actually really good that we had the time, and thank you very much, Ahmed, for that, and for starting a little bit early. That definitely helps us as we progress through the rest of the day. But can everybody please put their hands together for Ahmed? Thank you very much.